Well, they're headed out. Can we give another thank you? Not a hey, kudos to you, but another thank you to Love All for leading us in worship this morning. I mean, they're not done. They're still going to come back up here. But it has been incredible to see you use your talents that God has given you to not just go out and be like, hey, look at me, but hey, look at God. And look at the greatness of God. That's what we're all called to do with different talents. We're not all going to get up here and lead worship. And some of you are sitting there going, yep, I'm absolutely not doing that. But we all have been given talents by God to use in different ways. And so we thank you for being willing to use those. Because they're tennis, all of you play tennis, right? Hence the name Love All. It's a little bit of a double meaning there that, love all, if you know anything about tennis, is when the score is 0-0. I have that right? Yeah. It's been a long time since I played tennis, but I was pretty sure I had that one right. But it's also, the meaning of, hey, are we not supposed to love all? I've never understood why tennis decides to use 0 as love. It makes no sense to me whatsoever, except maybe it's saying that, hey, we all start out in the same place. And, I don't know, maybe there's some way they're tying that in. I have no clue. Maybe you can fill me in on the history of why love is used as 0 at some point, probably not right at this point. But as I think about sports, and as tennis in general, but sports even bigger, one of my favorite things now about going to a hotel room is that it is my only opportunity to turn on ESPN. I don't have it at home. When I go to my parents' house or whatever, we don't really turn on ESPN. We turn on the Game Show Network, and we watch Family Feud for hours and hours on end. We don't watch ESPN anymore. Anybody else do that when they get around? You just get sucked into the Game Show Network, and you're like, I don't even know why I'm watching this. I don't care at all, but I still can't stop. So anyway, sports, ESPN, hotel rooms, I turn it on. I still don't really care about much of it, but it's I have the opportunity to watch it, so I have to do it. Lately, I was down in Florida, and I did exactly that. I turned on the TV in the hotel room, ESPN, and they started talking about the Auburn-Alabama rivalry because college football is getting ready to start. Now, I realize that around here, Alabama-Auburn, we may not care at all. But if you get down into Alabama, it is a big deal. I grew up in Kansas where we had KU and K-State, and we had all the family divided, type of stuff. You'd see the signs out front. Maybe you have some of that going on around here, and I just haven't seen it. But in Alabama, this rivalry is to the point that it has literally broken up families because the rivalry is so intense. It has promoted vandalism. I'm not just talking TP somebody's house, but serious vandalism has come out of this rivalry because Alabama fans and Auburn fans hate each other so much. They view each other, and obviously we don't mean every single Alabama or Auburn fan, but it's a big deal when you get down there. There has been accusations over the years of Auburn boosters paying people to go play for Alabama so that they can mess up the Alabama team when they play Auburn. To the point that, according to the show that I was watching, one booster had paid a player $30,000 to sabotage Alabama in the Alabama-Auburn game. We're talking big stuff. Alabama-Auburn, total hatred between the two. I could go on and on about the stories that they were sharing of just the pure vitriol that these two fan bases have towards each other. Now, around here, I haven't really figured out what it is yet that would be on par with that. Maybe some of you are like, yeah, it would be this, I haven't seen that. Obviously there's some sports teams that are kind of rivals, but not to that extent. I remember first moving here, I was thinking obviously the Colts and the Titans, you guys are going to clash because you're not that far away. And everyone looked at me like, yeah, we don't care. In fact, you looked at me kind of like we don't really care about either of those teams. So it's really no big deal. I enjoy talking to Bridget Yoder because she's a Kentucky Wildcat fan, and I'm a Kansas Jayhawk fan, and we recently passed them up for the most wins all time. But it's still we have a pretty good friendship, I think, as long as they're not playing each other. But in some places, it's a totally different story. I bring all that up because I think that as we look at life and we look at just our relationships with people in general, while as silly as it may seem, that the Alabama and the Auburn fans would fight as much as they do and would divide families and divide friends as much as they do, as silly as we think that all is, if we're being completely honest, we have areas of our life that we get so passionate about and we get so worked up about that we allow it to do the same thing, and other people are on the outside looking in going, wow, that's incredibly silly. Like, if you guys would just get over it, you'd be amazed at how much better your life would be. Or if you guys would just talk, you would be amazed at how much better your life would be. Now, some of these things, maybe they look a little bit less silly when we consider somebody that we would, think of as an enemy, like an Alabama fan is thinking of an Auburn fan. When we think of enemies, like the country kind of rallied around this idea that Al-Qaeda was an enemy to the country. And we fought against, and we're fighting against, and we push against ISIS, enemy to the country. Most people kind of rally around that. We kind of have an agreement about it. They're an enemy to our country. But then we kind of start trickling this down, and we start thinking a little bit more localized, and for some, they would consider the school board an enemy to their family. Or for some, it's the bully at school is the enemy to their family, or it's the teacher who doesn't take care of the bully at school, or it's the parent who raises the bully at school. This is my enemy. This is the person that I am dead set working against in my life. I hate this person. I can't stand this person. Maybe it's the coworker at work that just, they're constantly late. They constantly don't do their job. They're constantly making your life more miserable, and then somehow they're getting you in trouble for it. They become the enemy in your life. Or maybe it's just the person that chews their food too loud and they drive us nuts. Fyodor Dostoevsky, and I probably pronounced that wrong. I actually looked it up to try and do my best to learn how to pronounce that name. But he wrote this in the Brothers Karamazov. He says, "The more I love humanity in general, the less I love man in particular. In my dreams, I have often come to making enthusiastic schemes for the service of humanity, and perhaps I might actually have faced crucifixion if it had been suddenly necessary. And yet, I am incapable of living in the same room with anyone for 2 days together, as I know by experience. As soon as anyone is near me, his personality disturbs my self-complacency and restricts my freedom. In 24 hours, I begin to hate the best of men. One, because he's too long over his dinner. Another, because he has a cold and keeps blowing his nose. Now, for me, you can blow your nose as much as you want, but please stop sniffing when you have a cold. Drives me crazy. My kids will tell you, it drives me crazy. I become hostile to people the moment they come close to me. But it has always happened that the more I detest men individually, the more ardent becomes my love for humanity." We have so many things in our lives that we decide we will allow to turn us against another individual. When we look at reasons for divorce, or we look at reasons for friends to part ways, the number of those reasons that people on the outside are looking in and going, what? Are astronomical. Now, it's not to say that there aren't reasons for it that are good, solid reasons, but for many times, people on the outside are looking at it and they're going, they just annoyed you a little bit. Like, you've got to get through it because the next person's going to annoy you just as much, just not in the beginning. But we allow these things to kind of to work their way in, and they eventually begin to separate our relationships. I'll pull something in that's a little bit more recent in the news that has recently been one of those dividing things that many of us in this room have an opinion about. Maybe the things that I've mentioned so far, you're like, those aren't a big deal to me. I would never consider somebody to be my enemy because of little things like that or whatever. Over the past 2 weeks, there has been an explosion of conversation and argument and enemy making when it comes to the topic of student loan forgiveness. That as soon as those 3 words are given, people tend to immediately, like the hair on the back of your neck just rises because people have an opinion about it. And if somebody has a different opinion than you do, then they're obviously idiotic, stupid people who are just ruining our country. And it doesn't matter which side of the aisle you land on, many people are thinking that way about people on the other side of the fence. That they're sitting there and going, oh, you're for it? Well, you're just for a bunch of people being lazy, living off of the taxes of everybody else around them. You are a horrible human piece of trash. Okay, you might not go that far. I hope you don't go that far. Based on some posts that I've seen some people make, some of you aren't too far away from that. But then there's people on the other side of it that are sitting there going, oh, wait a second, you're against it? How can you be a Christian and accept grace that is freely given with no strings attached and not be willing to have forgiveness for other people? You are a horrible excuse for a Christian and a human being. And we quickly divide. We lay down the battle line of this is where if you're on this side and I'm on this side, you are my enemy. And if you're on this side and I'm on this side, you are my enemy. We could go on and on about all sorts of things that have started to divide I shouldn't say started to divide the country, continued to divide our country over the course of the past just couple months, couple years. We've talked about them quite a bit in here because we talk a lot about how do we handle these things? What are we supposed to do with this? In my hometown, there are two neighbors in Waukeena, Kansas, and there's people around this here too. But there are neighbors who live across the street from each other that one of them had a vote yes to the abortion law that they were just passing recently, or they were just voting on. And on the other side of the street was a vote no. Those two people don't talk to each other, yet somehow they hate each other. Somehow they are enemies of one another, even though they haven't had a conversation. Because that is how we are taught to treat our enemies. That is how we are taught to interact with those who disagree with us, especially on things that we're passionate about. Now, there are some things that we look at and we disagree on. We're like, that's no big deal. Deanna, our admin here, her favorite color is pink. My favorite color is blue. To this point, that has not caused any issues between Deanna and I that we disagree on our favorite color. But there are other things that are so much bigger. Not that I'm not about to say like Deanna and I had like these big disagreements about anything. But there are other things that we allow to just immediately mark the person who disagrees as our enemy. And I would even say it's okay to admit it. In fact, I would encourage us to admit that we consider some people to be our enemies. That we consider some people to be in direct opposition to what it is that I believe, or what I think, or what I do. I'm going to acknowledge that there are those people out there that drive me bonkers. I'm going to admit that there are people who annoy me just by opening their mouth. I'm going to admit it. One, because that helps me deal with it. But two, because Jesus actually told us that we're going to have enemies. So to deny that we have any enemies is to say that Jesus was wrong. And in here anyway, we believe that Jesus, well, maybe I should step back just a second. What we teach in here is that we believe that Jesus never said anything that was false. And he never said anything that was wrong. Jesus said a lot of things that were completely unexpected, as we started talking about last week. But he never said anything that was wrong or false. We mistake a lot of what he said. We misquote a lot of what he said. But that doesn't mean that what he said was wrong. And this morning, I want us to look at some words that he had to say about how we interact with our enemies, meaning we have and will have enemies. And I'm going to invite you to stand up with me this morning as we read this, just as a way, one, to keep your blood moving so that you don't fall asleep on me too quickly. If you're already asleep, this will wake you back up maybe a little bit. We're going to have the words up here on the screen, but this is out of Matthew chapter 5, and we're going to start in verse 43. Jesus says these words. He says, "You have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you," like we love that first part. Love your neighbor, hate your enemy. That one's easy. That's what the whole world teaches us. Everywhere we go, love your neighbor, hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. Look at that real quick. We're going to dig in a little bit deeper, but look at that. He says, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be. Meaning, if you don't, you won't be. That's the reverse implication there. If you don't love your enemies and pray for them, you will not be a child of your Father in heaven. He causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, big whoop. That's my translation of it. The New Living Translation would be, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? Now, before we start attacking IRS agents as being like the scum of the earth because he said tax collectors, remember what we talked about last week as far as how tax collectors were viewed. And I didn't put the next verse up there, mostly just because I meant to, and I didn't. But it goes on to say that if you love those who love you, it's no big deal, because even the pagans are doing that. Even those who don't know me, even those who don't love me, they do that. So now we're going to do something that we haven't done ever since I've been here. Tommy, can you take that back to the beginning of the passage that we just read? And I'm going to invite you to read this with me. As a way of saying, Jesus, we recognize that you said it. We may not like it. You might not even agree with it. But to recognize that he said it, would you be willing to read this with me? You have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. He causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? God, we thank you for your words. We thank you for the example that you set that we're going to talk about here in just a little bit, that you didn't just give us these words and say, now good luck, go out and give it your best, but that you showed us how to do this. You showed us that it is possible to live this out. And God, my prayer this morning, and I think it's probably the prayer of a lot of people in here, is that you would really show us and pull us in so that we can live a life that glorifies you. And this morning in particular, a life that glorifies your teachings on how we treat those who just rub us the wrong way. Those that we may not want to use the word enemy, but that if we are being really honest, we'd have to admit we consider them to be an enemy. God, we pray this in your name. Amen. All right, you can grab a seat if you'd like to. You can stand up the entire time if you want it. That will not offend me one bit, but I realize nobody ever takes me up on that offer when I say it. So just know, if you're getting like halfway through and you're thinking I'm about to fall asleep and I need to get my blood moving, it's not going to hurt my feelings if you stand up and start stretching out. I really think that I could walk off right now and most everyone, I won't say everyone, most people in this room will understand what Jesus meant when he said those words. We understand what it means to love people, to love enemies, to pray for those who persecute us. We just want to make excuses as to why we don't have to do it for this particular person. We want to come up with reasons as to, well, Jesus, he didn't mean it for this one. You know, when he said that, he wasn't thinking about how badly this person was going to hurt me. He wasn't thinking about how badly that person was going to hurt my child. He wasn't thinking about the atrocities that this group of people would commit. He wasn't thinking, no, when Jesus said that, like, he wasn't going there as in, like, love all of my enemies. He just meant it for those who it was easy to love, for those who, it was worth it for me to love. We love coming up with excuses. And I think I could walk off of here and we would understand what it means, and we would continue to go about making excuses as to why he didn't mean this particular person or this particular group of people in my life. Because these people just did too much. Or we like to make sure that we follow it up with, yes, we need to love everybody, and yes, we need to pray for everybody, but they need to understand there are consequences for their actions. And we always have to make sure that we put that caveat in there so that we can make sure that we feel good about the teaching that Jesus gave as far as loving our enemies. We need to love everybody, but they still need to get what they deserve. That's part. In fact, loving is tough love, and tough love sometimes means that we have to deliver, this tough news. All of that's true. But why do we always have to feel like we have to end it with that? Because we want to make sure that there is a piece of our version of justice for everybody who walks and does something wrong. We want to make sure that the people that we're loving understand, but you still deserve to be punished, and you will be punished for it. We want to make sure that road is still there. Instead of just taking what Jesus said to love our enemies and pray for those who persecute us, we try and add on to his sentences and add on all of these different things to it. Or we love to take that pray for those who persecute us and say, oh, I'll pray for them. I'll pray that God gives them what they deserve. I'll pray that they'll understand God's love as they're being punished by God. Or, end it with that, I'll pray for them because God will judge them. And we make sure that it's still there, that avenue is still there and still an option. Instead of just saying, Jesus told us to love our enemies and pray for those who persecute us. Not the ones who are easy. I mean, yes, we should love the people that are easy to love as well. He's not saying like, oh, good job, proud of you, don't do that. No, he's saying, yes, love that person, but also love the one that you absolutely don't want to love. A couple of quick things. I'm going to roll through these pretty fast, I think, maybe. We'll see. That as we consider people who are our enemies, again, admitting we have them. They're out there, or else Jesus wouldn't have had to give these instructions. First off, when we're thinking about our enemies, we have to remind ourselves that they are people just like we are people. Most people, when they do something that hurts us, believe that they are doing the right thing. I didn't say everybody, but most people believe that they are doing the right thing just like we believe that they are doing the wrong thing. They are people every bit as much as we are people. They are image bearers of God every bit as much as we are image bearers of God. No matter how bad they hurt us, no matter what it is that they did, they are still people just like we are people. In one of the churches that we came from before coming here, there's a lot of hurt going on in the church. And there's been a lot of hurt in a lot of churches. There's probably been a lot of hurt in this church. Some of you may have experienced some of it. And we sit there and we think, how could somebody who says that they love Jesus do something like that? Because they believe that they are right as much as you believe that you are right. It doesn't mean they're right. It doesn't mean we should just say everyone should just get to believe whatever they want to believe and we're not going to speak any kind of truth. But we've got to start in a spot where we remind ourselves that we have all been created in the image of God. We are all people. We have all fallen short, every last one of us. Another thing about our enemies is that we have to remind ourselves that we are someone else's enemy. I know we love to say when people, when they pass, when they die, he didn't have an enemy in the world. False. Everybody has somebody who thinks of them as even if it's for the silliest little reason, and when they're thinking of an enemy, it's really just, I didn't really care for that person. Everyone has someone who thinks of them as, well, we'll just say not a friend. Would that make it a little bit more comfortable to accept? I don't care how nice you are, there's somebody out there that doesn't like you. We just have to accept it. Now, what do we want them to do to us as their enemy? When I begin to remember that I am someone else's enemy, then it begins to impact how I treat those who I consider to be my enemies. It's that whole golden rule thing. Treat others as you want to be treated. You are someone's enemy. Therefore, how would you want to be treated? That's how you treat your enemies. Also, we need to remember that not all wrongs are actually wrongs. Not all of the things that those other people do that drive you crazy are because they are bad, horrible, mean people. When you're driving down the road and you get cut off by somebody, they are not automatically a horrible driver who is an insensitive jerk who they should never be allowed to be behind a wheel. They're not automatically that person because one time they cut you off on the road. One action does not necessitate an entire character for a person. It doesn't define who they are. And if you want proof for that, does every mistake that you make define who you are? Or is it just that you made a mistake and you messed up for a moment? I've cut people off on the road. Sometimes because I was getting back at them. I'll admit it. Usually because I was just an idiot for a little bit. You know, I didn't time out right my turn into the other lane. Or, whatever it could be. It's very rare. And it's less these days. Sometimes it's because I was looking at my phone. I know I'm the only person that does that, and I'm sorry for admitting. Brock, just erase that from your memory. You didn't hear that. And I do something dumb in that moment. But I don't believe that makes me a horrible person. I don't believe that makes me an inconsiderate jerk. Maybe there are other things in my character that all add up, and you're like, no, but you are. I don't know. But I don't think that one action gets me to that point. It's this thing called correspondence bias that we all have, that we sit there and we look at ourselves and we say, when I make that mistake, it's because it was a mistake. But when somebody else makes that mistake, it's because they're a horrible person. And it becomes a part of their character. Instead of understanding, it may have just been something that they accidentally did. They may have been misled. It may be because their upbringing is not the same as my upbringing. It may be because their home life is not the same as my home life. It may be because their job, they had a horrible day at work and I had a great day at work, and so now we're both living out of our day that we had at work. There's so many factors that could go into it, but when we have somebody who we've pegged as our enemy, they don't get an excuse. We always do. Not all wrongs are wrongs. And we need to remember when we're considering our enemies, this kind of ties into these, none of us are good people. Wait a second. But I do this, and I take care of people, and I give them food, and I serve, and I do all these things. I'm a good person. By whose standard? By whose standard are you considering yourself a good person? By the world's standards? If you want to go by the world's standards, it's going to be a real slippery slope. And it's going to change daily as far as what makes a good person. Maybe hourly. Is it by the standards of your siblings? Like, well, my sibling's a jerk and I'm not, so I'm a good person. Whose standard are you considering yourself a good person? Because by God's standard, He told us that all of us have sinned and fall short of His glory. So by His standard, none of us make the cut on our own. By His standard, He says, no one is righteous. Not even one person. No one is righteous on their own. It's the whole reason He came and died and rose from the dead was because none of us make the cut. None of us are good people. None of us are good people. Fortunately, we have a God who said, I'm going to die for a bunch of not good people. And I'm going to give a second chance to a bunch of not good people. And as we consider our enemies and what He said about our enemies, what He told us to do is to love those who persecute you. Pray for those who persecute you. Love them. Hope for the best for them. Seek the best for them. Pray for God's favor upon them. I know it makes our skin crawl sometimes. But it is really hard to hate a person and to consider them scum when you're looking at them through the eyes that Jesus looks at them through and praying for God's favor upon them. It's not praying that they won't get any kind of consequence for what they did. But stop making that a caveat as to whether or not you'll pray for them and love them. Really release that to God. Instead of holding on to God, I'm going to pray. I pray that you would love this person. I pray that you would redeem this person. God, please make sure they get what they deserve. God, I love this person just like you love them. I hope that they get what they deserve. God, I love this person. God, I love, pray, get what they deserve. Like, that's what we want to attach to it all the time. We pray God's favor upon them. We don't pray that they would begin to see things our way, but that we would see things His way. I would see things His way, you would see things His way, and together we all unite and we're searching for His way. Instead of trying to win a debate on student loan forgiveness, which you're never going to win the debate. Can we just call it what it is? We're not going to win these political debates that keep propping up over and over. You can put whatever thing you want out there on social media. It's not going to win the debate. But what if we started to love the people who disagreed with us? Doesn't mean we can't have a tough conversation with them, but what if we actually started loving them and we talked to them? Sarah and I, we've had our fights over the years. We've had our disagreements over the years. But we've never gotten to that point where we're like, you know what, forget you. I'm not going to talk to you ever again. We're no longer in this thing together. You are so wrong, we just can't do this. Because we talk about it. Because we love each other and we live as if we love each other. And that's what Jesus calls us to do with everyone else. His example was that He hung on a cross and He said these words. When they came to the place of the skull, they crucified Him there. And His words were, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. That's the example He set when people were murdering Him. When people had spit on Him, lied about Him, abused Him physically, mentally, spiritually, when they'd done about anything they could think of to make His life as low as it could possibly be and degrade Him as much as they possibly could, His response as the Son of God, who could call down angels upon them and wipe them all out, give them what they deserved, his response was, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing, because they're people too. They've been deceived. They've been misled. The only difference with him is he hadn't been. He's the one who actually could have sat there and said, you know what? I haven't made a mistake, and I'm still being treated this way. And yet he still set the example for us. Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. In 1 Peter, we read these words. Do not repay evil with evil or insult with insult. Definitely not the way we typically live. On the contrary, repay evil. You ready for this? I know you see it on the screen, but are you ready for this as how we've been told, how we've been instructed, how the example has been set for us as to how to treat those who hurt us? Repay evil with blessing, because to this you were called, so that you may inherit a blessing. I'm going to ask you one question. Love All is going to come up. They're going to lead us in a song. And I invite you to wrestle with this question as they're singing this song. Would you rather follow the example of the world or follow the example of Jesus? Or maybe I'll reword it this way because it's what's actually on the screen right now. Will we follow the example of what we expect, or will we follow the example of the unexpected that Jesus set? Which example are you going to follow as you leave here today? And as maybe somebody cuts you off on the way home. Maybe somebody cuts you off before you get out of the parking lot. Maybe somebody steals the last donut just as you're walking up to it. I know those are silly, cheesy examples, but man, they can set us off. Are you going to follow the expected example, or are you going to follow the unexpected example of Jesus? The choice is yours. Remember, as we sin and as we mess up, we set ourselves as enemies against Christ, and he looks at us and he says, I love you. I want to restore you. I have already prayed that you would be forgiven. We are not going out and doing anything for anybody else that Christ hasn't already done for us. That he looks at us in our brokenness, he looks at us in our distress, and he says, you are created in the image of God, and you are my masterpiece, and I want to restore you back to what you can be. And he calls on us to do the same thing for others. He doesn't ask us to do anything that he hasn't already done for us. Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. God, we pray this week for strength to do exactly that. We pray this week for strength to follow your example. And it is only with your Spirit that we know that we will be able to even start to do that. And so we go out of here in your power with your name. Amen.